Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the special meeting of the Budget Committee of the Board of Education for April 15th, 2013. We are now called to order. I'd like to extend a special warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. You can also find it online on their website. Interpreters are available. If they would please come up at this time and let folks know where to find them if they're in need of services.
Buenas noches, me llamo Carmen Witness y necesito servicios de interpretación en español. Vamos a estar atrás con los audífonos. Gracias.
Hi, I'm Liu, Chinese interpreter. 你好，我是刘红。如果你需要中文翻译的话，请告诉我，我们在这里。谢谢。
My name is Alakata Chugan. Somebody who speaks Russian or Ukrainian, I can interpret.
Great. Thank you. I'd just like to note that Director Regan is expecting to join us as she gets here a little bit late. We are now convened as the Budget Committee, and the purpose of our initial Budget Committee meeting is to receive the Superintendent's budget message and receive the budget document. The Budget Committee will not discuss or entertain public testimony on the proposed budget at this time. Public testimony, if you would like to share it with us, and we would love to hear your input, on the proposed budget will be taken this Thursday, April 18th at 6 o'clock p.m. in the Wilson High School cafeteria, and then again on May 1st at 6 p.m. here in the board auditorium. Again, we'd like to encourage folks to sign up in advance if they wish to testify, and please contact the board office if you'd like to. Tonight is the first time the superintendent is presenting us with a budget, and to clarify, we're just simply receiving the budget message tonight. While this is not the time for the board to engage in discussion or ask questions, there will be a specific process for board members, parents, and community members and staff to voice their support and concerns. With that, Superintendent Smith, would you please present us with your budget message and your proposed budget?
So you have in front of you a proposed budget document, which I'm officially presenting to you tonight. Co-chairs Belisle and Gonzalez, members of the school board. Tonight I'm proposing a $487 million general fund budget for Portland Public Schools for the 2013-14 school year. This proposal marks a pivotal moment for Portland schools. Within this budget, we have prioritized strategies to raise student achievement that align with our milestones, Achievement Compact and Strategic Framework, and the Racial Educational Equity Policy and Equity Plan. We remain focused on how to invest strategically and anchor ourselves in our vision for 2025. This is when our current kindergartners graduate from high school, and it is the year that the state's ambitious 40-40-20 goal aims to have all Oregon students completing high school and 80% attaining post-secondary credentials. I want to start this budget message by saying thank you. This city, our community, our families, our partners, and our staff have stepped up over and over again to support our schools and our students. This year, we're at a turning point in funding for schools in the state of Oregon. Since the passage of the Property Tax Limitation Measure 5, we have faced 2 decades of reductions. For the past 4 years, we have cut tens of millions of dollars each year as we navigated the worst recession that our state and our nation have endured in nearly a century. Since 2009, state education funding has been reduced by more than $500 million at the same time as costs have continued to increase. This budget checks the erosion of programming that has shadowed our current students nearly every year that they have attended school. For the first time in more than 10 years, state leaders have proposed to stabilize education funding and increase the share of the state budget that K-12 schools receive. Their proposed $6.75 billion level of support to K-12 schools in Oregon, which this budget is based on, provides Portland with relative funding stability over the coming 2 years. This budget is not one of across-the-board cuts like previous years, but some schools and departments will see reductions in resources because of changes in student numbers, loss of federal or grant funding, or decisions we are making about how to allocate resources. Stable does not equal adequate. As we face continued budget constraints, we have prioritized the mitigation of losses and the differentiation of funding based on student need. I applaud Governor John Kitzhaber and legislative leaders for their efforts to meet the demonstrated need for stable funding of our schools. This is a step in the right direction. The governor's 3-biennium plan for reinvesting in education is hopeful, with the next biennium seeing actual reinvestment in education in our state, we hope. In addition to the stability from the state, our voters approved an increase in our local option levy and a city tax to put art teachers in our K-5 and K-8 schools. Last year, we were able to reach a one-time agreement between the city, our teachers association, and the district that protected 110 teaching positions. These tremendous investments from our community have allowed us to keep teachers in the classroom and maintain a full school year when many other districts have been laying off teachers and cutting days. The voters also approved a $482 million school bond that will let us create 21st century school buildings in order to support the future of this great city. It is through these investments and tremendous partnerships and support that I'm able to say that our overall general fund budget will be relatively stable for the first time since I became superintendent 6 years ago. However, even with the difficult steps being taken to offer this level of funding from the state, no one should harbor the illusion that Portland Public Schools or districts across Oregon will be well funded for the 13-14 school year. As I went to listening sessions around the district and received results of our online survey, I heard about important programs that our community wants to see in our schools. A student at Roosevelt told me about how he loved his 9th grade academy and the support it provided him, but missed that support as he progressed into 10th grade, 11th grade, and finally now as a senior. A parent at the community listening session at Lincoln talked about needing additional supports for her student in special education. And a teacher at the Portland Association of Teachers Representative Assembly I attended reinforced again and again the importance of caring adult relationships to accelerate student achievement. That's the consistent message across every constituent group. This budget does not get us all that we need, nor does it replace all that we have lost. In the future, we want to see all Oregon move toward full funding of the quality education model, which establishes benchmarks for high-quality K-12 education and the level of state funding required to support it. Oregon will not meet its 40-40-20 goal by simply maintaining a no-cuts level of funding stability over the long term. We know that Congress's inability to avoid automatic across-the-board budget cuts, known as sequestration, will cost Portland Public Schools more than $2.5 million in federal funds that support some of our most vulnerable and underserved populations: special education, Head Start, English as a second language, and Title I, our funding for students on free and reduced price meals. The impact of education-specific sequestration cuts will be felt in PPS as early as June of 2013. In addition, we have a number of grants that are expiring. In many cases, these funds have been used to provide critically needed programs and services to develop new capacity for PPS, such as the AVID program. What does all of this mean for PPS? It means that this budget does not offer us the ability to build back lost programs, reduce class sizes, or shield schools from enrollment dips. For too many school communities, this budget echoes cuts from previous years. While enrollment continues to increase for PPS as a whole, some schools will have fewer students next year and therefore fewer teachers. However, because of the hard work at the state and in this community's investment, this budget allows us to sustain important programs that are working for students. It also allows us modest but important opportunities to make targeted investments to accelerate our recent gains across our student achievement milestones. I'm encouraged to present you and our community with a proposed budget that does the following. Add 66 staff positions to our schools in the general fund, which will in part mitigate the impact of losses from federal sequestration cuts and sunsetting grants. It makes targeted investments to accelerate gains in our graduation rates, supports early literacy, and increases student achievement among historically underserved students. Preserves effective programs also threatened by expiring grants and federal sequestration cuts. Reinvests $3.3 million in savings from operational investments and efficiencies back into educational programs while maintaining support for school building care. It differentiates resources to target supports for our historically underserved populations in alignment with our racial educational equity policy. It aligns with the board's commitment to building an employee compensation policy and structure that both appropriately reflects the marketplace and the caliber of talent that we as a district want to retain and attract. This budget specifically prioritizes this investment for our school leaders. And finally, this does not draw from the school district's reserves to balance the budget and maintains our current level of reserves, which is a significant just measure of exactly the point we are with this budget. This budget proposal reflects a continuing commitment to the vision and strategic priority framework that has guided our work as a district. We want every student, every teacher, and every school to succeed. We want to prepare every student well for the next level in his or her education so that all students, regardless of race, class, or zip code, complete school ready for college, career, and able to make positive contributions to our community. We want to support effective educators, offer rigorous and relevant programs, provide individual supports to our students, and foster strong partnerships with families and community. This focus has served us well. Our schools have produced overall gains in our milestones despite the financial hardships of sustained budget reductions. The four-year graduation rate in PPS has increased 10 percentage points since 2008-09. The percentage of students who are reading to learn by the end of third grade has increased by at least 4 percentage points each of the past 3 years. The percentage of 10th grade students who are on track to graduate has increased every year. The achievement and opportunity gap between white students and students of color has narrowed at key grades and subjects. And district-wide, the gap in graduation rates between white students and African American and Latino students has narrowed. This year, at the same time as graduation rates went up for white students, that gap was dramatically narrowed and even closed for many racial groups at comprehensive high schools such as Franklin, Grant, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Wilson. Despite deep cuts to our operational support departments in the last 4 years, PPS has made a number of targeted investments and utilized effective business practices to produce efficiencies. These savings have allowed us to direct additional resources back into our educational programs and maintain our school facilities. Our project to convert the district's remaining 89 oil-burning boilers at 47 different schools to cleaner and less costly natural gas burners was projected to save more than $1.8 million in fuel costs this year. This past summer, we completed the first round of conversions at 33 schools, and we're exceeding expectations for savings, which allows us to reduce our utilities budget by an additional $600,000 in the coming year for a total of $2.1 million per year going forward. I'm just going to say yahoo. That's a big deal. In order to manage the cost of custodial overtime, 8 additional full-time custodians were hired to cover the hours created by absences. This efficiency saved $40,000 even after the cost of adding the additional 8 full-time equivalent custodians. This is another great one. A new transportation contract resulted in a net savings of $670,000 in propane costs, which will be reflected in the 2013-14 budget. Over the last few years, the Transportation Department has also been working with special education to reduce the number of students who are transported by cabs. Through this reduction in purchased transportation services, the Transportation Department is saving an additional $180,000. In 2009, PPS completed the first large-scale solar roofing project undertaken by a public school district in Oregon when we fixed leaking roofs at 9 schools and installed 5,565 solar photovoltaic thin film modules. As a result of this work, we received an energy rebate of approximately $1.2 million. These funds can be used to finance facilities capital expenditures in 2013-14 and relieve costs to the general fund. Through a partnership with Multnomah County for purchasing paper and improved processes, our print shop saved $200,000 for the general fund. And in addition, IT has phased out some software maintenance agreements and implemented newer applications with lower annual maintenance costs, saving the school district approximately $285,000. Our finance departments have made reductions of over $300,000 by reorganizing to eliminate positions, reduce overtime and payroll after a software system upgrade, and reducing non-personnel expenses. And then finally, in addition to the $3.3 million in operational savings that are being redirected, we have general fund dollars that have been used to finance several debt service requirements through transfers to other funds. We paid off one such debt in 2012-13 and are making a final reduced payment on the custodian settlement debt in 2013-14. The cost to the general fund for this debt service will be reduced by $4 million in this proposed budget. So I'm just going to say those are all really significant impacts on the revenue we have to work with to provide services to kids. So I'm going to just stop for a minute, so I appreciate that. Every year, our biggest investment is in the people who support our students and families. I heard across all stakeholder groups that the top priority for this budget was to get more adults in schools working with our students. I am proposing a net increase of 66 FTE in the general fund for schools, which in part offsets the impact of reductions in grants and federal funding. Staffing in our schools for 2013-14 is based on the following: the projected student enrollment, an equity formula allocation, the new arts tax, and additional supports for focus and priority schools and for high schools. In addition, we're increasing our maintenance of effort in special education by more than $2 million. We also, this next year, expect a decrease of students identified for English as a second language services, all of which impact our staffing. In keeping with previous year's socioeconomic status, or SES allocation, we are providing a portion, 4% of the staffing ratio to schools, with high percentages of students on free or reduced price meals. As Title I funds have decreased and we limited the number of schools receiving those funds, this SES allocation has provided key resources to schools such as Sabin, which no longer receive Title I funds, to sustain the strategies that have led to gains in student achievement. It's also clear from our data that students in poverty are not the only students we need to target for resources and services. In alignment with our racial educational equity policy and our milestone and achievement compact targets, I am also allocating another 4% of the staffing ratio to schools with a high percentage of historically underserved students. The combined historically underserved measure is defined by the state of Oregon in our achievement compact as students from one of the 4 historically underserved racial groups: Black, Latino, Native American, and Pacific Islander, students who qualify for special education services, students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals, students who qualify for English as a second language services. This new allocation differentiates resources to schools to address closing the achievement and opportunity gap for our historically underserved students. We have set ambitious targets for all of our students, and we must resource schools to fund the strategies and the supports needed to ensure that all students succeed. These equity allocations are an important investment toward those goals. Thanks to the voters of this city, the arts tax will fund 45.5 arts teachers in our K-5 and K-8 schools, ensuring that every student has access to visual arts, dance, music, or theater in grades K through 5. Research has demonstrated the academic benefits for students who participate in the arts. We know that across the country there has been a persistently inequitable distribution of arts in schools. Our city has helped to eliminate this gap in service. We want to thank you once again. So I'm going to just do a call out to our city. We've also allocated 20.25 FTE to support those schools identified by the Oregon Department of Education as priority and focus schools. These schools are identified as the lowest performing 5% and 15% of Title I schools in the state, respectively. We are requiring that these targeted FTE must be used to provide school-wide support in specific ways that have proven successful in our own schools and in schools nationwide. Examples include capacity building, for example, reading specialists, and provision of social emotional supports, for example, counselors and school social workers. So we're being directive with how that FTE is used. So we're also directing support toward early learners. While we've seen important gains in our third grade our third grade milestone, we've now set an ambitious goal of 100% of this year's kindergartners reading to learn by the end of third grade in 2016. The significance of this goal was reinforced in our student listening session, where a high school student talked about how important it is to be on track in reading in the early grades, because once students fall behind, it is extremely challenging to catch up. In this year's budget, we continue to prioritize a number of key strategic investments to accelerate this work, as well as preserve our investment in effective early learner programs in the face of federal cuts. We maintained our commitment to full-day kindergarten by preserving almost $5 million of funding in Title I schools for the second half of the day that is not funded by the state. We maintained our commitment to target kindergarten class sizes of 25 or fewer through a separate staffing allocation for kindergarten, and by providing additional staffing capacity set aside to respond to unexpected increases in kindergarten enrollment in the fall. We have prioritized K-3 literacy and English language development in the upcoming language arts curriculum materials adoption. We are committing $1 million to these two areas, $200,000 in this budget and $800,000 in the 2014-15 budget in order to complete that adoption for the early grades. And this is really a K-12 adoption, of which we're prioritizing the early grades as the piece we'll implement immediately. We will expand our early kindergarten transition program to all 9 priority and focus schools, and preserve the program by moving its funding from Title I into the general fund. And you recently heard about this program where students are practicing kindergarten during the summer, highly successful. So this will now be in all of our focus and priority schools. We'll preserve funding for key early learning programs such as Head Start, pre-kindergarten, and the SIA program to support literacy for Latino families. And that remains with Title I. At the community listening sessions, students and parents have been clear that the cuts we've taken in our high schools have been felt deeply. State funding cuts have increased staffing ratios at all grade levels over the last 4 years, but the impact of these cuts has been compounded in our high school system by a demographic wave of declining enrollment that is making its way through the system and reaching the high school grades. 2 years ago, we changed to an 8-period high school schedule, which is common in Oregon school districts, in order to staff schools more efficiently and mitigate the pressures of reduced funding. That strategy enabled every high school to preserve programs and protect class sizes, even with the reduction of 45 FTE that year. Today, high schools are able to offer as many class sections as they did 3 years ago, and students on average are taking more classes. I have heard from many high school parents and students about their frustration over student schedules. PPS is constrained by an arbitrator's decision that limits the number of classes most students can take to 7. The only exceptions to the arbitrator's ruling are academic priority students and students receiving special education services. We have requested that the arbitrator reconsider this decision, and will continue to advocate for the ability to offer all of our students a full schedule. This is one that's a topic of great concern in every conversation I've been in out on the budget listening sessions. Many grants and federal funds that have been used to support high school initiatives are sunsetting, reduced, or unstable. These include our voluntary public school choice grant, school improvement grant at Roosevelt High School, the foreign language acquisition grant, a small learning community grant, Title II-A funds for professional development, which are being reduced, Title I supports for students on free and reduced price meals being reduced, and a high school graduation initiative grant, which is uncertain because it's tied up in the federal conversation. This budget proposal continues to mitigate some of the cuts we previously took in high schools, as well as the reductions associated with the loss of federal funding and grants, by investing 35 additional FTE to specifically support high schools above the general school staffing formula. This investment includes the addition of 1 FTE of directed support to each of our 9 community comprehensive and focused high schools to improve our graduation rate by supplementing existing resources for career learning or helping students meet essential skill requirements for graduation. There's also a dedicated set-aside of 10 FTE that will be allocated in the future, so did not go out with the enrollment forecasts that have already will be distributed tomorrow morning, but will be allocated to help high schools mitigate problems caused by changes in enrollment and support access to the core high school program. We're providing additional support to our focus and priority high schools, Roosevelt with 3 FTE and Jefferson with 2.25 FTE, to sustain the gains they're making in their graduation rates. The high school system reforms that the school board approved 2 years ago have improved our graduation rate and other measures. We need to sustain and accelerate these gains. Earlier this year, we outlined a comprehensive set of recommendations to broaden and deepen reforms in our high school system and step up the pace of improvement in alignment with our milestones and the state's 40-40-20 goals. We committed to expand opportunities to keep students on track toward a diploma, have access to rigorous and culturally responsive programs, engage in career-related learning, and earn college credit while they're in high school. This budget includes a number of targeted investments within the constraints of our high school staffing allocation that are designed to address these recommendations and accelerate the pace of our graduation rate gains. Key elements of these investments include, at our focus high schools, we maintained the commitment of additional FTE to support specialized program requirements at Benson for career learning and at Jefferson for the middle college program. We have continued the support for the coordination of the AVID program in the general fund next year to replace the expiring voluntary public school choice grant. AVID helps first-generation college-going students prepare for post-secondary success. At our budget listening sessions, many students told me about how AVID helped them become motivated and confident about college. We're prioritizing credit recovery opportunities for students who are not meeting the 10th grade on track to graduate benchmark, and we're adding general fund support for summer scholars, which was previously funded through voluntary public school choice grant, which is going away. We are maintaining contracts with culturally responsive partner organizations such as SEI and Step Up that have provided valuable support to our students, and maintaining our Sun Schools to continue to support students outside the school day. Continuing to support the college-going culture in our high schools through the Senior Inquiry Program at both Jefferson and Roosevelt. Maintaining our financial commitment to support students in completing high school in programs operated by our community-based partners. We are continuing work that's already underway to ensure that students are placed in the most rigorous and challenging programs for high school completion. And we'll support an intensive study commission this year to identify student academic needs by age and credits so that we can provide all students with the most competitive credential that they can attain. And as you know, we're continuing the support for the Youth Pass program through our partnership with TriMet in the city. This program provides TriMet bus passes to all PPS high school students to ensure access to school and internships, as well as building a generation of public transportation advocates. Over the course of the next year, we'll work with our partners on this initiative to identify sustainable funding. We are creating a coordinator position to continue to grow our successful reconnection services, which has grown exponentially, and increase our capacity to work with our community partners on reconnecting disconnected youth. In online blended learning, we are committing to the next phase of investment to expand our capacity for credit recovery by adding highly qualified ELL, special ed, and math teachers. We are also adding funds for materials and professional development, which will be matched by funds from a grant with Mount Hood Regulatory Commission. And finally, we are developing a new district-wide program called the Portland International Scholars Academy, or PISA. This program will be for students in grades 9 through 12 who are new to PPS and who have limited proficiency in English. This program seeks to build on the strengths of our emerging bilingual students and support those students to graduate. We will be developing this program in partnership with the International Refugee Center of Oregon, or IRCO. And it will be housed at one of our home high schools. Later this month, we're launching our high school action team that includes stakeholders from across our high school system and community. This team will make recommendations to further the goals of high school system design around content and instructional changes to accelerate student achievement and graduation success within the framework established in high school system design. We know that effective school leadership and teachers are the highest leverage strategies we have for raising achievement for all students and closing the achievement and opportunity gap for our students of color. Our effective educators' strategic priority focuses on supporting principals and teachers in developing their professional practice and relationships with students in order to accelerate student learning. Students tell us that it is the relationships they have with their teachers that both inspire their love of learning and keeps them engaged in the classroom. In response to teacher and principal input and in alignment with best practice research, we are adjusting our professional development model to better support teachers in their work for students. This will include expanding the teacher mentor program for new teachers, where an experienced teacher is released from teaching for 3 years and works with 15 new teachers to support their professional development in a non-evaluative setting. We plan to expand this effective program by funding additional mentors next year. Continuing to emphasize our work in culturally responsive instruction and assessment through professional development and school teams focused specifically on closing our racial achievement and opportunity gaps. Leveraging our very effective peer coaching and mentor model beyond new teachers to provide experienced teachers with the collegial critical partnership with a mentor and coach to continue to fine-tune their craft and service to students. And finally, offering professional development in a variety of flexible learning platforms that include webinars, blended learning, full-day professional development on district initiatives, and site-based professional learning when requested. We are also continuing to provide budget support for our evaluation work groups on teacher and principal effectiveness. These teams are working to develop, implement, calibrate, and refine how our evaluation tools align with Senate Bill 290's requirement to include student growth as a factor in evaluation. I am hopeful that we'll continue to work collaboratively with the Portland Association of Teachers in these and other work groups to identify strategies and opportunities to ensure that all students receive culturally responsive instruction. We've seen exciting gains in student achievement over the last few years, and it's imperative that we continue to focus on raising achievement for all students because we are not yet where we need to be. This means we'll continue to have equity at the center of everything we do. The Racial Educational Equity Policy identifies equity goals for PPS and recognizes that we will need to differentiate resources and services in order to meet those targets. As outlined in our equity plan, we will continue to support the professional development of our board, staff across all schools, and the central office to enhance our culturally responsive practice and decision-making at all levels of the organization. Develop an affirmative action policy and implementation plan. Provide resources to support the implementation of the Jefferson enrollment balancing process. Revise the enrollment and transfer policy to align with the Racial Educational Equity Policy. And maintain our investment in our family engagement staff and continue to contract with culturally specific community-based organizations. PPS has a persistent challenge of overrepresentation and exclusion of students of color in student discipline. I'm including funding for a third-party hearings officer to improve disciplinary consistency across the district and to allow our principals to continue to play a different role in disciplinary situations where they are able to serve as advocates for students rather than the discipline decider. We will also expand effective prevention strategies such as restorative justice to continue to eliminate disparities in our discipline outcomes. Dual language immersion programs provide opportunities for students, in particular our emerging bilingual students, to gain access to a language development and curricular experience. In this proposed budget, we are continuing to build this capacity. Cesar Chavez will add a second Spanish immersion kindergarten class, which will double the size of that program over time. At Scott, the Spanish dual language program will now include kindergarten and first grade. At Lane Middle School, the first class of students from Kelly's Russian program will join as sixth graders. And over the next year, we will be planning for 2 new dual language immersion programs to begin in 2014-15, one Spanish dual immersion and the other world language, which is still to be confirmed. As you know, we have balanced our budget over the past several years by asking our employees to make sacrifices in compensation. Earlier this year, when approving my contract, the board acknowledged, and quote, staff members throughout PPS have foregone raises for years, and this year also took furloughs in order to preserve a full school year and our classroom staff. We both deeply appreciate this commitment and sacrifice, and at the same time recognize that this is not a sustainable long-term strategy. We need to be able to offer competitive salaries in order to attract and retain the best talent to serve our students, end quote. In the last 2 years, no employees received cost of living increases, and only bus drivers, ATU, and teachers, PAT, received partial or whole step increases in both years, and our classified employees, PFSP, received a step in 2010-11. This year, teachers delayed their step increase until January, and all non-represented groups took a pay cut in the form of furlough days, ranging from 3 days for school leaders to 6 or 10 days for central office employees. in order to help fund the one-time agreement with the city, the district, and PAT that preserved 110 positions in our schools. In the last 5 years, our non-represented staff, including our principals, received a single 2% cost of living increase in 2010-11. For 2013-14, we have already reached agreements with ATU, DCU, and SEIU. There are modest increases included in all of these agreements. Contracts with PAT and PFSP expire on June 30th, 2013, and we are in the process of negotiating new agreements with them. In order to continue to recruit and retain strong principals, I have proposed a new salary schedule for school leaders based upon a comparison with other school districts in the Portland metro area that brings us back in line with the market over the next 2 years. The average increase under this proposal is 3.3%. We are also continuing to further strengthen the alignment of our principal evaluation tool with Senate Bill 290 and our racial educational equity policy. In this budget, I have also included a step increase for other non-represented employees. Some director-level positions are on salary grades that do not include steps. For these employees, this budget includes a 2% salary increase. One reflection of the relative stability that I described at the beginning of this message is that PPS is not using reserves to balance this year's budget, nor is the district adding to reserves in the current fiscal climate. In this budget, the district maintains reserves in the form of an operating contingency of $20.7 million or 4.1% of expenditures, which is consistent with the current year. The only change to contingency compared to forecasted beginning fund balance is a small transfer out of the specific reserve for capital work on one of the Great Fields projects. All of the benefit from the legislature's commitment to K-12 education in the upcoming biennium will be invested in staff, programs, and services, not used to increase reserves. Risks and uncertainties, and there are a few in the budget I am proposing to you. The state legislature has not yet approved the appropriation for K-12 education, so the $6.75 billion that we've assumed in this budget is still a work in progress. We also know that the PERS changes in tax expenditure reform that the co-chair's budget is based on are not certain to be adopted. That could have a dramatic impact on Portland's budget. For PPS, the difference between state funding at a level of $6.75 billion and a $6.55 billion state budget is $8 million for our district. It's the difference between making and maintaining the investments I've described and that benefit Portland students, or another 2 years of further cuts and fewer programs for our students and schools. Similarly, if the legislature comes closer to their targeted glide path to the quality education model of $6.895 billion, we would be in a position to add more staff to our schools. This budget includes mitigation of some of the $2.5 million in program cuts brought on by federal sequestration. I want to applaud our U.S. senators and our congressional delegation who've been working hard to stop these cuts. I'm deeply worried that federal sequestration reductions could be even more damaging to future budgets. Finally, our school staffing formula anticipates $4.5 million from the arts tax. If revenue collection is too low or there are significant changes that reduce the funds passed through to PPS, this would mean fewer teachers in our schools. Assuming that the state legislature funds K-12 education at the equivalent of the $6.75 billion proposed by leadership, this budget represents a year of relative stability for Portland after years of reductions. And we are in a very different place than many school districts across Oregon, where $6.75 billion still means millions of dollars of cuts. However, this is still not an investment budget. Many schools will still face cuts. Some schools may be losing a grant-funded program that worked to improve student achievement or face the loss of teaching positions because of fewer students in their school. As a system, even in our years of greatest resource scarcity, we have seen student achievement gains and a narrowing of the achievement and opportunity gap. We have seen these gains because we've prioritized our limited funding towards high-leverage strategies and made smart operational decisions. In every budget, we have consistently informed those investments by maintaining a focus on our student achievement milestones, targeting our limited funds to accelerate student achievement, keeping equity at the center of our decision-making. At every budget listening session, I heard how much these cuts have affected our students and educators. And this budget will not replace all that we've lost, but it has allowed us to mitigate other reductions in a number of places, including our high schools. It has also allowed us to continue to better align our practices and resources with our student achievement goals and the racial educational equity policy. In the coming years, our priority is not just to avoid cuts, but to invest in programs that support students and in strategies that work. With additional funds, our schools could expand effective interventions that are helping to narrow the achievement and opportunity gap for our most underserved students, including students of color, hire additional teachers to stabilize or reduce class sizes, restore key programs and electives such as full-time library and PE in elementary schools, offer high school students more classes and increase access to career learning education, fund full-day kindergarten and expand early learning opportunities, and restore classroom assistants and school support staff. And this is the wish list you heard in every budget listening session and more, but people just hungry for what we want to build back. These investments will only be possible if our governor and legislative leaders continue to make schools their top priority in future legislative sessions. We will be counting on their continued leadership. The future is promising for Portland Public Schools. We've continued to make gains toward all of our milestones despite years of budget cuts. We have aligned our milestones and strategic framework with our local and state partners and identified academic strategies that we know are working, and we are just beginning to build the school facilities of the future thanks to Portland voters' approval of the historic school bond measure last year. I look forward to continuing this important work with all of you. Thank you all for the work you do on behalf of our students.
Smith, we appreciate your message and your budget and the work you and staff have put in to create this document. As you pointed out, that while it's relatively stable, it sure required a heck of a lot of pulling from here and pulling from there, because there are other resources that aren't just from the state that are disappearing on us. So thank you. The board is scheduled to hold discussions on the proposed budget on the following dates: April 22nd, April 29th, May 6th, and May 13th. So we encourage you to come and provide testimony in addition to the public hearings that I mentioned before. At this time, the board, acting as budget committee, can discuss the process itself as outlined, but we're not going to discuss the content of the budget itself. If my fellow board members have any particular budget questions or areas of discussion, I ask that you please email or contact or let Superintendent Smith and the co-chairs know if there's something in specific that you want to follow up with in those times. Are there any comments about or questions about the process?
Could you just go through the timeline for when we as a board will actually be approving the budget?
Sure. I'll give you what I can recall off the top of my head.
Okay.
May 25th, is that, thanks. So we will have our budget hearing on April 18th, a public hearing, another one on May 1st, and then the aforementioned meetings, April 22nd, 29th, May 6th, and May 13th, and on May 25th, we are scheduled to approve or adopt the budget. Are there any other questions? Okay. Without any other questions, I'm gonna, we're gonna end as budget committee, and I will reconvene us as the Board of Education to consider our business agenda. And now, as a Board of Education, we'll now consider the business agenda. Ms. Houston, are there any changes to the board? Thank you. With no changes, do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda?
So moved. Second.
Director Knowles moves to adopt, and Director Regan moves to seconds to move the adoption of the business agenda. Ms. Houston, is there any citizen comment on the business agenda? There's not. Is there any board discussion on the business agenda? No. I will note that there is funding for some Sun schools, so I'm just going to note potential conflict of interest for me. But with that being said, the board will now vote on the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Business agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Representative Garcia voting
Yes.
yes. With that, the next meeting of the Board of Education will be a public hearing on the proposed budget this Thursday, April 18th at 6 o'clock, Wilson High School cafeteria. Just a reminder to please contact the board office to sign up in advance if you'd like to testify. And with that, this meeting of the Board of Education is adjourned. Thank you.